So if you say 1 plus 1 equals 2, but you keep adding it up and it's not equaling 2, then you're going to have a problem.
Well, if you're trying to add 1 and 1 together and can't get it to equal 2, then chances are you're a member of the Globebusters YouTube team. The Globebusters are a team of science-denying YouTubers that meet together on a weekly basis to discuss big, important scientific topics in some kind of competition to show the world which one of them is going to be the most confused today. They also have a wonderful subscriber base who aren't afraid to join in that competition, such as this guy here, who says water is another one of God's mysteries. We don't even know what it is, but it's impossible to add 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, which doesn't even exist, and come up with water. It's a mystery that humans cannot ever understand. Talking of things people don't understand, I passed this to my team of translators and they had no clue what this meant. Maybe you can help. If Earth came from the void and is essentially within a torus field, then it hangs on nothing. Let me know what that means in the comments. Now, in case you haven't guessed, one thing that all our globe busters have got in common is the idea that the Earth might not quite be round.
So many people today are still thinking that Flat Earth is a dying movement. And the more that we show the kind of activity that's going on in the Flat Earth movement, is the more we can show that it's definitely not dying.
Well, I think I can help with that because the purpose of today's video is to highlight the kind of activity that's going over on the Globebusters channel.
Like I said, this is peer review. And if there's anything I've said that anyone disagrees with, please let us know about it. I want to know about it.
I can promise I'm about to let you know.
Just don't be a jerk about it.
I can't promise that, but let's begin. What is today's topic?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Globebusters Tech. I'm your host, Zach Good Times for All, and today we're going to be talking about Newton's laws.
Yes, today we're going to be learning all about Newton's laws of motion and how, apparently, the Globebusters team think they can be broken. Now, what I want you to remember is that this stream hasn't happened by accident. They haven't just accidentally logged onto a computer and found themselves speaking to each other and a live audience on the internet about Newton's laws. What they've done is they have prepared this presentation beforehand. They know what the topic is. They have researched the topic, and this is the best that they have to give.
But we can start with Newton's first law of motion. An object at rest remains at rest, and an object in motion remains in motion at a constant speed and in a straight line unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Okay. When we think about that, it being a law, okay, what is the standard to break that law? I don't think enough people think about that. Okay. If this is the law, then what is required to break that law? Does anything come to your mind when you think about this?
So now it begins. The Globebusters team are about to explain how Newton's laws of motion can be broken. And they begin by talking about what effectively could be a ball on a shelf.
Well, the first thing that popped into my mind is, what if you had something on a platform, don't apply any force to it, and just remove the platform? The force was always being applied to it. There wouldn't be any extra force applied to it, but it would move after that.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. You know, you were so close. I did run your little thought experiment past my team of expert physicists and the world's top researchers, myself, Brian Cox, Neil deGrasse Tyson. We sat down and we realized that although on the surface of it, you may seem to be onto something incredible, it turns out that putting something on a shelf and then removing the shelf, it doesn't break Newton's first law of motion. I'm sorry to break it to you. You were so close. Now, in my research, I had to dig out this. This is for children in the UK. It's the section of the GCSE specification on Newton's laws. This is the bit on Newton's first law. And it does say in the first sentence here that Newton's law talks about the resultant force acting on an object. Now, I can't believe I'm going to have to explain this to somebody who has literally just done a live stream, the purpose of which is to educate people about Newton's laws. But when an object is on a platform, yes, there is a downward force acting due to the weight of the object, but there's also an upwards normal force present due to the presence of the platform. The two cancel each other out, so therefore there is no resultant force and the object doesn't move. If you remove the platform, there is no normal force. The resultant force then equals the weight of the object. And then, in accordance to Newton's first law, because the forces acting on the ball are now unbalanced, it will start to move. Anyway, how else can we break Newton's first law? Can we break Newton's first law simply by chucking an object?
Yeah, what about just even throwing it like a softball where it goes into an arc or that? In other words, if the constant straight line is only dropping something straight down, it doesn't account for something going sideways or a wind or any type of effect on that.
Okay, I think I know what's going on here. I think you've read Newton's first law and you've noticed that somewhere in that law are the words straight line, and you've rightly recognized that an object in projectile motion doesn't travel in a straight line. But unfortunately, and I hate to break this to you, that also doesn't break Newton's first laws. It's all to do again with unbalanced forces in that vertical component. Maybe I'll make a video on it another time, but for now we have to jump to the leader of this presentation, Kyle Adams, because he's about to interrupt with the answer. How do we actually break Newton's first law? Here it is, for real.
If we wanted to break that law, what do we need to do? And so my example that I've got here is that I've been thinking about is we've got a boulder, okay? An object at rest remains at rest, and an object in motion remains in motion at a constant speed in a straight line unless acted upon by an unbalanced force, okay? So pushing on a boulder that doesn't move, does that break the standard? Okay, if I push on a boulder, am I an unbalanced force if I come and push on it and that boulder doesn't move anywhere?
Now, actually, this isn't as silly a suggestion as the others that we've heard so far. As a science teacher myself, I've had this misconception from my own students where they feel that you're applying a force to an object, therefore, according to Newton's laws, it should move. And if it doesn't, they can't quite understand what's going on there. And I do explain to those 12-year-old students what the answer is, and I'll explain that to you in a second. But first of all, there is another equally important question, and that is, when you're applying a force to this boulder, what if the force you apply is so big that it smashes the boulder into a million pieces?
And what happens if that force is too strong and instead of going in a straight line, you smash it into a million pieces with too much force? So again, a lot of variables. Keep going, Kyle.
Okay.
Yeah, keep going, Kyle. We haven't got time to get into the advanced stuff.
Or does the law require that because I'm applying a force to it, that boulder should start moving?
Yeah, it's kind of what would imply, in my opinion.
Now, this isn't an entirely dumb question. It is certainly one that they would have found the answer to had they bothered to do actual preparation for the stream. But there are two types of friction. We have static friction and kinetic friction. And essentially, static friction acts between a stationary object and the material it's at rest on. And when you push on that boulder, for example, the force you apply is matched by the static friction. So essentially, the resultant force is zero and the object isn't going to move anywhere. Only when you can apply enough force to overcome the static friction will the object start to move. And then obviously you experience kinetic friction. Anyway, what happens next is they pull a document onto the screen and they start reading it. Now, why they pull it up on the screen and why they start reading it in this show that they have obviously prepped beforehand, I have no idea, because it becomes very, very clear very, very quickly that they have absolutely no idea what it is they are looking at or even why they're reading it.
Then it goes on to say resistance is usually ascribed to bodies at rest and impulse to those in motion. But motion and rest, as commonly conceived, are only relatively distinguished. Nor are those bodies always truly at rest, which commonly are taken to be so. Kind of lost me there.
Yeah.
Anyway, now it's time for the team to give their conclusion on Newton's first law. Before we see that bit, I'd like to remind you that Globebusters have over 70,000 subscribers. I'm obviously one or two behind that. If you could help me out, I would be hugely, hugely appreciative. If you just could pop that subscribe button, it really, really does help. Anyway, what is the conclusion of the Globebusters team? Well, one of the team thinks that there's too many ways to get around it and it's just not a very good law.
Yeah.
So we can just come up with all of these different ways to get around it. And so it's not a very good law of motion.
Exactly. We've learned that if you put a book on a shelf or you throw a ball or you're not strong enough to move a boulder, then Newton's first law crumbles. What about Kyle, the guy who's put this presentation together? What does he think about Newton's first law?
Yeah. So there are parts of Newton's law that I agree with, and then there's other parts that I don't agree with.
And the bit he does agree with, I think, is the bit that we would all agree with. Kyle Adams from the Globebusters channel has learnt that if you take an enormous boulder and put it down somewhere, it will not get up and walk around.
An object shouldn't just automatically jump up and start moving. Okay, that would be breaking the first law here. Okay, if you've got a boulder and it's no force is acting on it, and all of a sudden it just starts moving, that doesn't make any sense. The boulder should just, if I put it there, it should stay there unless something comes along and causes it to move. Okay, so that's the part of Newton's first law that I agree with.
Kyle, I am so pleased for you. And whoever it is in your life who is telling you that boulders will get up and walk around, maybe just stop talking to them. Now, we've done Newton's first law. It's time to completely butcher Newton's second law.
So, Newton's second law, okay? This one is more famously F equals ma. Force equals mass times acceleration. The acceleration of an object depends on the mass of the object and the amount of force applied. Okay.
Well done. Now, at this moment, I'd like to remind you again that Kyle Adams has prepared this presentation on Newton's laws, full in the knowledge that he's going to come and make a YouTube video, knowing that thousands of people are going to watch it. So what has he researched about Newton's second law?
Force equals mass times acceleration. Okay, so the force of what equals the mass of what times the acceleration of what? That's a huge question right there.
Well, it's not a big question. It is the simplest little bit of understanding required to talk about this topic. Obviously, when we talk about F equals ma, we are talking about the resultant force that is acting upon an object, the mass of the object, and the acceleration experienced by that object. It is so easy. It's so easy, in fact, that one of the other Globebusters team doesn't completely and utterly butcher explaining to Kyle exactly what it means.
So take it like something pushing a rock. Say a guy's pushing a 500-pound rock, and he can apply only so much force to it. Well, he can only get it to move so fast, that 500-pound, rock, rolling it. Whereas somebody bigger with more force can move that same rock faster, can make it accelerate faster.
But that doesn't do it for Kyle, and despite Kyle being the person that has planned this presentation on Newton's laws to stream to thousands of people, he now has to be hand-walked through what force equals mass times acceleration means, and it is so painful to listen to how he struggles to come to terms with the topic that he has decided to make a public presentation on. This is peak Dunning-Krueger, peak flat earthism, and it's brilliant.
Okay, so we've got our guy, and he wants to get this rock into motion, and you're saying that F equals ma is the amount of force for him to push on this. So there's the amount of force he's applying to the rock, okay, and then there's the mass of the rock and the acceleration of the rock, and so we've got the force of two different things. So you're not saying that the rock has any force; it's about the amount of force required to get.
No, it's just the mass. The rock is just the mass.
Yeah, we got the mass of the rock,
and the only force is applied from the guy pushing it. The acceleration is the outcome of that force. Now,
acceleration is the outcome of the force. Okay.
Now, if you have a bigger person pushing that can push it harder with more force, they will be able to accelerate it faster.
Okay.
And then if you wanted to have them accelerated at the same pace, the two different people, you would give the bigger person with more force a bigger rock until they're... So that's where the MA works out. If the mass goes up without the force going up, then the acceleration is going to go down. And vice versa.
Yeah.
And after that, he almost gets there.
The force of the man equals the mass of the rock. and times the acceleration of the rock.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to think about that here real quick.
Excellent. Now, I would advise that maybe a good time to have thought about this would have been before you did the stream, before you decided to teach people about Newton's laws. And also, you are not correct. It's not the force exerted by the man on the rock. It's the resultant force experienced by the rock. And that, of course, is his problem when he goes on to say stupid things like this.
This rock, he's pushing on the rock. The rock is not moving, okay, because it's too heavy for him to push. Does that mean the force of the man is, so we got A is 0 over on this side, okay? The rock obviously has mass. Does that mean the man is not applying any force to the rock?
No.
Because F0, so 0 is acceleration, right? M times 0 equals 0.
Well, he just doesn't have enough force to even start an acceleration. So
Okay.
F equals ma doesn't apply here.
It really is like the blind leading the blind, isn't it? Kyle, a couple of things. Think about Newton's law as talking about the resultant force acting on an object in future. I'll just leave it there. Secondly, you know nothing about this topic. Why would you put yourself through this? Why would you troll yourself in this way by making such an example of your lack of understanding about something that we teach 12, 13-year-old students over here in the UK? Why would you display your complete ignorance on this topic so publicly? I have absolutely no idea, but it is typical of the Flat Earth community to do such things. And it is typical of your subscribers to watch and assume that you know what you're talking about. This is the most embarrassing video I have ever seen from a flurf ever, purely because of the confidence that you have put on show here by preparing this mess and then delivering it. I mean, I don't know. I am lost for words. One person who's not lost for words is Ranty. He is back. If you don't know Ranty, he is an ex-flat earther, and he's come back on the internet and he fights misinformation now. And he also has revived the Almost Unbelievable YouTube channel, a channel that I used to share with him. And he's now come back to tell some amazing stories. These are really, really interesting. Please go and check it out. I've linked this one here in the description. I think you're really, really going to be impressed with the type of content he is putting out now. And this will not be the last time I mention him on this channel. Again, linked in the description. Now, you might be asking yourself what happened to Newton's third law in the globebusters stream. Well, it turns out that they were so confused about Newton's first and second laws that it took them so much time to arrive at any kind of conclusion about them that they didn't have enough time to address Newton's third law. So we get to laugh at that in the next stream. They're going to pick it up then. At the end of the stream, Kyle says this. I've kind of played this clip before, but he seems to honestly believe that what he has done here is a peer review of Isaac Newton's laws. That's right, a peer review.
Like I said, this is peer review. And if there's anything I've said that anyone disagrees with, please let us know about it. I want to know about it. Just don't be a jerk about it. And so, yeah.
Kyle, I think it will be quicker for me than to address what you got wrong. It will be quicker for me to address what you actually got right in this stream. So I've taken all those clips and I've put them together here for you. So what have we learned today? Well, we've learned that you can break Newton's first law by putting a ball on a shelf and then removing the shelf. We've learned you can break Newton's first law by throwing a ball across the room. We've learned that if you're not strong enough to push a boulder across the room or by yourself, then you're out of luck because it's not going to sprout some legs and walk across the room for you. We've learned that Newton's second law can be summed up with the equation F equals ma, even if we're not sure yet what those letters mean. And that is what we have taken from the channel that is Globebusters. Thank you so much for enriching our scientific experience here on the internet. Technology is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I will see you all next time.